So now we're moving into the section of the finances, which are actually going to look at your receipts and your expenses. And we're going to start with the receipts. Receipts covers lines 14 to lines 20. Now, an important thing when we're looking at the receipts, and this is a little bit distinct with our statistical report than what you're reporting to the CRA or what you're reporting to your congregation. Because what we're really interested in is to differentiate money and funds that come to support ministry for current use in the current year or ministry for future use and future year. So you'll see that a number of the questions really emphasize for current use. And this year we really put that in the questions to really highlight that for you and make it clear. So for example, 14A, 14A and B, 17, 18 and 19 all are exclusively talking about money for current use in the current year. 16A bequests is going to be interested in bequests that come in for the current year or for future years. It's just interested in the bequests that have come in for the church. And then when we're looking at lines 15, 16, we're going to look at ones that are monies for future use, for future years. And that's really important to keep that in mind. I'm going to come up and bring it up again. So line 14, this is the biggest line, biggest explanation. In fact, it's going to spread over 2 pages. So in line 14, this is where you're going to include your envelope, your PAR, your online donations, and your loose offerings. It also is going to include the rental income for the current year. It's going to include any mission gifts for Presbyterian Sharing, PWS&D, any other external missions that you're supporting out of the cold, ecumenical ones, any type of mission support that you have. It's going to include any bequests or legacies that you've used and applied to the current year. So for use in the current year. So if you received a bequest for $50,000 and you used $10,000 for this year, you're going to include $10,000 on line 14. It's also going to include any interest and capital that you've had that you've used in your current year. So if you've just rolled the interest and capital back into the fund and it's building up for more for future use, then you don't need to claim it in line 14. But if you've actually used it to pay for expenses, then it's going to be in line 14. If you've sold a piece of property, any funds that were used for current purposes will be included in line 14. Maybe you had a manse that you sold for $1 million and you used $100,000 for this year. Then you'd include the $100,000 and the other $900,000 would be included in a different line. The CEWS, so that's the grants that have helped to support your minister, that will be included here because it's money that has come in to support your current year purposes. And any other grants except for Canadian ministry grants, so grants that maybe came from your presbytery, from a municipality, from foundation, they'll be included in line 14 if they were used for current purposes in the current year. And then any other funds that we used for current purposes. So basically this is going to be the bulk of the income for your congregation. Now we'll look at some of the other lines and see where you record the other funds. Oh no, 14A. Oh, the gross rental income, right. You'll notice last year we added this question. So the gross rental income and the net rental income. You may be wondering why we want to know this. Well, one question was in line 14, should people be reporting the gross or the net rental income? Right now, the policy is that the gross rental income would be reported there. But we've been asked to consider perhaps it should change to net rental income. So the Finance Committee is doing a study. So last year they asked this for the first time. We've asked again this year because of COVID. It was been such an exceptional year, and this is another exceptional year. But we're gathering this information to make a decision in the future. So that's why it's asked. Line 14 right now should include already your gross rental income. So you're just pulling it out for us just so we can see that part. All right, then line 14, sorry, go back. I just missed that one. Yeah, sorry, yeah, you can move on.
Can I just ask one quick question about 14?
Sure.
We use a lot of interest money to our budget. Is that included in line 14?
Yes. If the interest money was used towards your budget and to pay for your current expenses, then it's included in line 14. If the interest money is reinvested and it's just sitting in the bank to support future ministry, then it's not included in line 14. I also saw that if in 2021, if the church has received CEWS monies, where is that reported? If the CEWS monies were spent in 2021, then they are included in line 14. If there was some that is going to be spent in 2022, then it would be reported in 2022. Where do we report grants from provincial government to cover loss of revenue due to COVID? If you use the money in 2021, you report it in 2021. If you did not require the funds, yes, then you don't have to report it. Report it into what you can report it under other funds. That's funds for use in the future. Okay, I will keep going because I think once we look at the other lines, this will be clear. So line 15 is the net proceeds from the sale of property for use in future years. And this is where we've added the for use in future years, just to make it really clear for you when you're putting it in. So again, that example, if you sold a manse for $1 million, $100,000 was used for your expenses this year, $900,000 went into the bank for future years or to support the accommodation allowance, you're going to put it in line 15. Line 16, this is your funds for use in future years. So this is any endowment funds that you have created, and you received money to create an endowment fund, any bequests where you didn't use all of the bequests in your current year, any capital projects, so you're fundraising for a capital project that's not going to happen for a couple of years, you can put it there to restore the stained glass windows, for a new organ, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Oh yeah, all of that funds can go in line 16. If the government grant is not used, that portion that's not used for the current year, you can report it in line 16. Line 16A is, again, this is just like the rent. This is one that we want to have it pulled out. So it's already included in line 16, but we want to know now how much of that money was specifically bequests. And that can be used in future or in current years. We're just trying to monitor the number of bequests that Presbyterian congregations are getting each year. And then line 17 are the grants from Canadian ministries for current use. Actually, if they were for future use as well, you would put it in line 16, but grants from Canadian ministries for current use go into line 17. And that means that they're not included in the dollar-based calculation. So that's why they get their own line, but allows us to see that that's where it has gone when we go to reconcile it with your financial reports. Okay, and now just to see a question, what about facility rental funds that were paid in 2021, but will be not used until 2022? It's a little bit of a judgment call for you. You could, it depends what you're doing, but for use in current year. So you could say that it was for use in 2022, if it made a difference. All right, so now we're coming to major repairs and renovations. So these are funds that were used for this year. So this is for your current year, funds that you raised and helped pay for major repairs and renovations. So this might be your heating and cooling, it might be your roof, your basement, your foundation, mold mitigation. There's a whole list of ideas of things that are included under major repairs and renovations. The key for this is that the major repair or renovation needs to exceed 10% of your normal operating expenses, which you'll see in line 25. If it's less than 10%, then it just goes into line 14. But if you've done a big capital project to improve your congregation or to keep your congregation maintained, and it's over 10% and you've done it in the current year, then you report it in line 18. If it's for future years, so let's say you have a campaign going right now to put an addition for the church school at the back of the church, and this year you've raised $5,000, but it's going towards $1 million project. $5,000 is less than 10% of your normal operating expenses. Well, but it's also not for use this year, it's for use in the future. So you can report it under the line for use in the future. So really in line 18, Jackie is going over it and she's comparing line 18 with line 25. If it's less than 10%, she's going to put it into line 14. So some of treasurers may have noticed that in their reports. Right, do the next one. Other revenue in current year. Okay, so now this is for other revenue in current year. And this line here is for, it's money that came in for the current year, but it's not really used exclusively for your congregation. So a good example is some congregations run an Out of the Cold program. It's really a community project. They got lots of money from the community. It's not seen as just sort of a St. Andrews program. It's a community program. And so they're just really acting as the lead agents. So the money, it's in and out, it comes in and then it goes out, but it's not really the congregational ministry money. So that money can go into line 19. Other examples might be, for example, if a congregation is running an independent camp, it's really larger than the church itself, but they're the ones who are handling the money. They are doing the oversight. It could go under line 19. And so then we've asked them to specify, just describe briefly that type of revenue in line 19A. So then once you have this, here we come into our first auto-calculated figure, line 20. This is going to add up, and hopefully if you're using the PDF, it'll add up correctly, but definitely on mine, it will add up. All the receipts for all purposes. So it's line 14 to 19. And this gives us the idea of the overall expenses of the church, and that gets reported in the statistical report, and it gets reconciled with your financial statements. So it's important to note that if this doesn't agree with your consolidated statement of receipts and disbursements, to please provide a reconciliation for us when uploading the financial statements. Because congregations, there's so many different ways that the money is accounted for. So just explain it to us so that we understand, and we'll make sure, as long as it's following the principles of the questions we're asking, then that should be fine. Okay, so now we've got times for more of these questions.
Okay.
So someone has asked a question to be clear. For the stats report, current year refers to the financial year that you are reporting for. So you're going to be doing a 2021 statistical and financial report on 2021. So you're going to be talking about the figures for 2021.
Okay. What about facility rental funds that were paid in 21 but not used until 22?
Yeah, so there's you can use the principle that they're meant for 2022, and that's where something you could put a note when you're sending in your financial statements about why you put those funds into the use for current year, just so that when we see, oh, look at this much came in rent, but they've only claimed $30,000 in rent, but they really received $50,000, and it's because someone has prepaid their rent. Oh, it's because someone has prepaid their rent. That's a quick, no problem.
Okay, and is a bequest the same as a memorial donation?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, well, depends on what you think a memorial donation is, but the principle is the same. It's a bequest is often the money that it's left in somebody's will. So Beatrice died and has left $10,000 to the church. Sometimes immemorial donations are Beatrice has died and I've made a donation in honor of Beatrice. So again, the same principle. Is the money for use in the current year? Is it going towards the current church budget this year? Or is it being saved for the future for a special project? If it's for use in the current year, it goes into line 14.
Okay. And the CRA asked for half of the grant money back. What number do we use now?
Well, so we're really only asking you, oh, okay. That's a loan. So there's going to be a place where you're going to report back the loans that you have paid back. So if you've paid a loan back, then that will end up being deducted later. But if you've used the money, so again, with the loans or whatever has come, even if you've gotten a bank loan, if you're using it in the current year, it goes in line 14. And that's money that has helped cover your current expenses.
Okay. Is this report just for general church account, or can it include accounts like enduring mission?
So this report, oh, I love that, because Morris is the one who introduced to me the consolidated statement of revenue and expenses. So Morris, I'm going to let you maybe talk about that. You're already on.
No, you need to, when you're preparing the financial statements I think I've mentioned this in prior webinars. You need to take all of your financial statements, put them on a worksheet, and add up the revenue from each of the funds. And sometimes you also may have amounts that are moving from one fund into your general fund. You can do an elimination in that. But yes, you've got to include all your funds that are your reporting on your annual report, except if you have, I guess it's the WMS, have a special CRA number that they're using separately, and you don't need to report the WMS, but generally all revenue is reported on this statistical report.
So these lines, that total number for church expenses is really to give us an idea, all of the funds that you have expended, all your special funds. So there's different places you get to report them. But if it's mission expenses, if you're keeping funds which are for mission expenses in the current year, they should be consolidated together and should be reported in line 14. When it comes to the dollar base, you're going to get to deduct them. So they're not going to become part of your dollar base, but that occurs later. So right now we want to get the whole picture of the ministry that your church is involved in.
Okay. Can a few major repairs be combined to qualify?
Yes. You think that you can add up the major repairs to be the major repairs you've done in this year. So yes.
And just to be clear, current year refers to 2021, right? Not 2022?
It refers to whatever year you're talking about with all the finances, yes.
Okay. Regarding line 14, some churches receive money for future use and not for current purposes. For example, maintenance fund in the year, as you've pointed out. Often when they're used in a future year for current purposes, this either is not reported in line 14 or does not readily transparent. Do you have any comments on how to do this clearly in your financial statements?
Yeah, so that's what Morris was talking about for having consolidated reports, that you need to report on all of your funds. And so any of the funds that we used for current year, then that's when they need to be reported. So if you've received in 2021, $5,000 that's going to be used in the future, you're going to report that $5,000 on line 18 for use in the future. But then when it is the future, so suddenly we're in 2023 and you're pulling the $5,000 out of that maintenance fund and you're using it to do your maintenance, you're going to put it either in line 14 or line 18. If the maintenance, if the capital is, if it's for repair or renovation, that's over 10% of your normal budget, you can put it in line 18 and it's not going to be part of your dollar base. But if it's a fund that's just supporting the overall regular maintenance of your church, you're going to put it in line 14, and it's less than 10%, you're going to put it in line 14. So you have to really understand what the question is asking for.
Okay.
And we ask you to be honest and try and be as fair to us as we're trying to be as fair and generous to you as well.
And where does the income go for a multiple charge church who gets 40% from a second charge for expenses?
Larry, I'll let you answer that. You deal with you don't. Oh, Morris?
Yeah, I would say that if it's revenue coming in, it would be reported on line 14. If it's coming in from another congregation that you're subletting or using, or they are a tenant of your congregation facilities, then it's just revenue coming in as rental.
Where is the expenses coming from? That also could be part of your thing. Where is it being used in the current year? We don't want it double reported, right? Like we want it, yeah. Yeah,
well, presumably if they're using your church or your facilities, you're going to be paying all the bills, the hydro and things like that. So it'll all be part of your cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. In line 19, the in and out funds, does the out fund need a charitable number and be reported in 26B3?
No. So the in and out funds don't require a charitable number. In fact, they're the ones that don't have a charitable number. If they have a charitable number, then you're going to report it in line 14, any money that you raised for it, because then you're going to take the money out. In line 26, any money that you take out needs to first be reported in line 14. So the in and out money is the money that it doesn't have a separate charitable number, but you're doing the mission, you're the lead agent sort of for a mission that's bigger than your congregation is or normally would support.
Okay. We receive funds from an endowment fund for student bursaries that are distributed in the current year. Is that reported on line 19?
14.
14.
14. Okay. Money for PWS&D is not for the use of the congregation. On what line is this reported?
Line 14, you're going to get to reduce, you're going to get to take it out again for your dollar-based calculation, but it was raised by the congregation for mission. So it goes into line 14.
And do the minister's stipend and expenses get included in this line if you're a 3-point charge? And sorry, let me read. Yes.
I was going to say expenses is a different line. Right now we're talking about income. So yeah.
So it's just if, sorry, we're a 3-point charge, the amount we receive from them for the minister's stipend and expenses, does it get included in this line?
Yes.
Okay. We rent out our facility to community groups for a nominal fee. We're probably losing money. How do we determine net rental?
Basically, you have to apportion all of your utilities and janitorial supplies to the rentals and subtract it. If you're losing, you're losing, but it's a judgment call on portioning out those expenses.
Okay. Our memorial.
I'm just watching the time because I think
Sorry.
we probably have lots of questions on this. I'm going to
Yes.
move on to our next section so we can get that, and we'll come back to questions at the end if they haven't been answered.
Great, thanks, Karen.
Okay, we're going to be looking at the expenses section of the statistical report. So you want to go to the next slide, please? Okay, line 21 relates to the stipend of the primary or principal minister. And it's just the primary or principal minister that goes on line 21. If you do not include on that line, you do not include interim moderators that may be filling in your congregation. You don't fill in for an interim minister or pulpit supply. It's purely the stipend that's paid to your principal minister. If you're vacant in the year, the number will be 0. Then going on to line 21B, you would expect to pay the utilities for your minister. And again, you would put that down. Now, it may either be that you pay them directly, or you give them a fixed amount, or he asks for reimbursement of your expenses. So they would just want the utilities would win. Now, in one case or in some cases, you may find that you're paying the minister who's not living in a manse, you're giving a housing allowance plus utility allowance as well. You need to separate that out and just put in the utilities and not the housing allowance. Housing allowance does not come into this line at all, into line 21 at all. Sorry, one thing I should say that there is anticipation that this line 21 in future years may also include all ministers, but it's not in effect for the current year for 2021. The other item that's on the line will be any continuing education allowances that you give them. That will be line 21C. There may also be some other monies that you would give them. I know in our congregation that we give a book allowance. So it goes on to 21D. It's not part of the continuing education, but it's additional monies that we offer or provide to the minister for the book allowance that he can buy up to a certain dollar value. In multi-point charges, you're only reporting what your congregation or your church is paying in relation to it. So you've got to imagine split the amount that you're paying the minister over the 2 or 3 or 4 congregations and just report your share of the allowance. Next slide. Okay, we come to the other expenses. Now, on line 22, I should say that on that line, sorry, line 22, you do have to fill in the amount that you're paying to other professional workers who are either full-time or part-time, such as, say, a second minister or a third minister, members of the diaconal order or ministry, youth workers, Christian education workers. But again, do not include any housing allowance or allowances that are paid to them for that. And do not include church secretaries, organists, office administrators, etc., etc. They all go on to line 23. On line 23, you've got to go through and pick up all your expenses that are reported on your consolidated schedule of all your expenses. That would include all your operating expenses for maintenance in the church. It will also include the housing allowance that would now come in that was reported on 11A. So you pick up those, pick up the health and dental, other staff salary costs, any programs or committee costs. And one important thing that we had a long discussion about was in relation to HST and GST rebates. That credit that you receive would go on line 23. One of the things that we get into on line 24, and sometimes you may have to kind of work backwards because you know what your total expenses are when you do your consolidation of all, but then there are certain things that have to be backed out and later reported on line like line 26. So you've got to back out, if you know the total expenses, you're going to have to back out the amounts that are going to go on line 26. And then there are other things that have to be backed out or removed. One of the items that may also cause you to have a reconciliation between your total expenses reported on your financial statements and the total expenses being reported on the statistical report is line 24. On line 24, you can fill in the debt repayment. Now that includes both interest and principal, but normally when you know if you've got a loan or a mortgage, it's sitting on the balance sheet. So what you would do when you make your payment, you're going to, in your financial statements, you're going to reduce your principal outstanding. That will be a debit to your balance sheet, but then you'll also have a debit for your interest in your operating statement. So these numbers will not exactly line up. There's a definition problem that you need to take into consideration to come up with your normal expenses. And the normal expenses in this case, because you're going to be able to deduct the debt repayment on line 24 as part of the dollar base, you would be able to take off both the principal and the interest, but on your financial statements, you would only be charging or expensing your interest. So it's something that you need to be able to prepare a reconciliation for to go forward with that number, the right number there. And then you go down to fill in on line 23 will be all your expenses. Then you have your on line 24, you've got your debt and repayments, interest and principal, and then you come up with a total of the expenses, and that's an automatic calculation on the form that will fill in on line 25. But again, this number on line 25 will not equal your number that appear on your financial statements, because there again, there are certain adjustments that have to come out, the like of the amount on line 26, plus any principal that you're paying back on your debt.
Now, I get to talk about this line 26 mission. And it's been an interesting line because we often get asked questions about it every year. So let me see if we've tried to simplify it and streamline it to make it as clear as possible without having to get into a big definition of what mission is. So the first one is line 26 is 26A is the amount that you have remitted for Presbyterian sharing. And then line 26B is the amount that you've remitted to the PCC for mission other than Presbyterian sharing. So you might think, where do I get these numbers from? Well, the easiest thing to do is to look at your congregational remittance report. Go to the next slide. So this is the congregational remittance report. So when you get the congregational remittance report, at first, go over all the numbers and make sure that they are correct. This one for congregation St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church has very many, and we'll go to the next one. Next slide. At the very end of the congregational report is a summary document. We've tried to make this as easy as possible for you. So you'll see Presbyterian sharing, the year to date received. So you want to wait until you get your very final congregational remittance report. And it says how much has been received. So the year to date received is what you can put in for Presbyterian sharing. Now here's that's for the other mission, the year to date that you received under PWS&D and the year to date that you received under other PCC mission. You add those two together for the other mission. So just take your final numbers there, and those are the numbers that you can use for that. And we do compare that with what comes in. In fact, the report that goes in the acts and proceedings actually pulls the number that you have sent in. So sometimes we've had congregations who have collected money for 2021 Presbyterian sharing, and they've missed our deadline. So they've sent it in after January 18th or whatever the deadline is for the PCC books when they were closing. That is going to be reported in the next year. So it may be slightly different from your books and what you have, as long as you've sent us all the money in 2021 or in the first 10 banking business days of 2022, then your number is going to be correct here. If not, there may be a slight discrepancy, but you'll make it up next year because your numbers are going to not have it next year, but we will. We always use the numbers that were actually sent in. Right, so those are the first two lines. The next line, 26B2, is the amount that you've expended on refugee sponsorships. Some of you may be wondering why we have included this line. Well, the PCC is a refugee sponsorship holder, and the sponsorship of refugees is very important to the church. And we encourage congregations to sponsor refugees. Now, often a sponsoring group won't have their own independent charitable registration number, though they might raise funds that are used for the community. So you can deduct this you can put it on as included on mission. Now here's the point. Any of the amount expended on refugee sponsorship, it needs to be reported first on line 14. You don't get to deduct money that you didn't report on line 14. So if you included your refugee project as InOut Funds and reported it under the InOut line, I think that's line 19, then you don't get to deduct it here. This is only to deduct expenses that were reported on line 14. But here you can include your amount expended on refugee sponsorship. And thank you for sponsoring a refugee. Next one. Then you get line 26B to 3 is for all of the funds given to other registered charitable, missionary, or mission organizations. They can be serving local, national, or international missions. In this list, you do not include Presbyterian sharing, PWS&D, or presbytery or synod dues. The listed mission organizations must have a Canadian charitable registration number, and there's a place to put that in the list. If you've got more than 11 gifts, you can attach a list using the browse files selection, and you can find the list and attach it for us. And then finally, the total amount to other mission organizations, once you've listed them all, you can put in the total that was supported there. So that goes in line 26B3. Next one. So auto-calculated, line 26 will be auto-calculated. It's just going to add up lines A, B, C, or A, B1, B2, B3. And that's going to give us your total mission expenditures. And then line 27 is going to be your total expenditures. So it's your mission expenditures plus your normal expenditures. What was ever was 25. And then we finally get line 28, the congregational surplus or congregational deficit. Now, ideally, because you're reporting the money that came in and was expended, came in for current use and spent in current use, you should not have a large deficit here. There might be small deficits, just the way that church goes. You get in a bit more extra money and you didn't quite spend it, or you spent a bit more than you actually got in. But anything that's larger than $10,000, we're going to be looking at, because we're going to say, well, where did the money come from to cover this deficit? And if it's really large, you need to attach a plan with how you're going to deal with it in the future. So that is line 28, where you're going to report your congregational surplus or deficit, and large numbers are going to be flagged for us to look closer at your numbers. So I just saw somebody asking, where do the synod and presbytery dues get reported? They get reported under the other expenditures. So the amount raised by the, line 29 now is the amount raised by the WMS and AMS Society. That is where you get to report their amounts. They may or may not be included, depending if they have their own registered charitable number under the reports you do to the CRA. But for us, for our purposes, you can report them separately. All right, so now we have time for questions. So I'm thinking, before we go into questions and get back into the dirty, just because of the time we're at and we're getting close to 3:30, I'm going to talk about the dollar base and how all of these numbers work together to get to the dollar base, and then we'll go to questions, because that'll pretty well cover us and take us to the material we wanted to cover. So why are we doing all of these financials? One of them, as we said, it becomes the statistics for our denomination. So we want to give a picture to the larger society of all the mission and ministry that the Presbyterian Church in Canada is doing. It helps us articulate, what are we doing? What's the impact we're having in Canada, around the world, in our communities? But the other thing that we do is to help it to determine a dollar base. And the dollar base helps us determine what's the fair share, the share that we're going to ask congregations to participate in mission and ministry, and in the contributing to the pensions of ministers and diaconal ministers and other professional church workers. So the dollar base is calculated as this. First of all, the first line is line 14, that one that is all the revenue that came in to support your mission and ministry purposes for the current year. So this is your big bulk number. So that's line 14. Then, in order to get your dollar base, you're going to take away all the money that was remitted for Presbyterian sharing, PWS&D, and other mission, including refugee sponsorship. Now, other mission is really the money that you've given to other charitable organizations. The fact is, everything that your congregation does is mission and ministry. So right here, we're talking about really the mission and ministry that you've given to others to do mission and ministry on your behalf, plus refugee sponsorship. So that's sort of the distinction there for line 26. So you get to deduct that, and that's because you've given it away. There's not really sort of a church identity that you've got, that this is exclusively St. Andrew's, Heathcote Presbyterian Church's mission and ministry. It's something we've done collectively. And then you also get to subtract any debt repayment that you've made. So if you make any debt repayment, and that can be whether it's repayment loans that have come for the government or paying loans that come for the bank, both the principal and interest, you can subtract those. And that's going to give you your dollar base. And this is just really the dollar base is to have congregations sort of on the same level playing field. It doesn't matter where the money came from. If it came from donations from individuals, if it came from grants, if it came from interest of your savings or for funds that you've put away and you've traded to support. It's like what has been used in the current year. So that becomes your dollar base. And that's line 31. And that is auto-calculated. So we'll go to the next slide. When you're doing it online, you don't have to add it up. It'll take all of the numbers that you have put in. So it'll take the line 14. It'll take the total mission expenditures. It's going to subtract and give a subtotal, then it's going to subtract the debt repayment, the principal and interest, and it's going to give the dollar base. So then once you have the dollar base, you'll see that there's a little button that you can upload a copy of your financial statements and any reconciliation notes that you have with your statement of income and disbursement. If you can't If you can't upload them, please email them to Jackie. You could take a picture with your phone, just anything, so that if we look through we're like, oh, what's this number mean? And we want to look, we can look back at the financial statements and we can compare it with you. So yes, if you are doing the PDF, and we have a few who fill out the PDF either by hand, you will need to do, if you're filling it out by hand, you're going to have to do this calculation by hand. This calculation should work if you do it on the PDF. As Maggie said, it's only some computers, some browsers. The PDF has these little glitches, and we're always surprised every year. We get this, we're looking, why did this number become so big? And it's because the PDF has had an auto calculation problem, which is why we're really hoping you'll use the online forms. All right, I think, oh yes, the next questions, these are very simple. But the contact information, and we have done a little change this year. So we're looking for the contact information, the person who has filled out part 1 for the statistics, whoever you want us to ask questions, if we have questions about it, that's who you put here. And the contact person for part 2, the finances. The finances doesn't have to be the treasurer. It could be the bookkeeper. It could be the accountant. It could be whoever you want us to go to when we have questions about this specific form. Because then we have in the next section, where we're going to ask you for your clerk of session information, and we're going to ask you for your treasurer information. And if you can fill this out, this helps us to keep you up to date throughout the year. And we will compare it with the clerk of session and treasurer information we already have. If there are changes to the clerk of session, chances are Catherine is going to check them by the presbytery as well, because she gets the information from the presbytery. Feel free to send in the updates throughout the year to your clerk and your treasurer. We're trying to keep in contact with you more by email. So if we email you, send us back an email and let us know who the new treasurer is, and then we won't fill up your inbox, we'll fill up somebody else's. But particularly if you're not receiving emails, then send us the information. It's really helpful if we have a phone number that we can call. It's even actually, some people will like this. Right now, we're even calling a lot of treasurers often to get the financial information for congregations so we can do an e-transfer if somebody gives a gift of stocks to your congregation. So that's why we might want to contact the treasurer if we get a gift of stocks and we want to send it to the congregation quickly and safely through an e-transfer. Okay, so once you've filled in the contact information, oh yes, and some people asked us, we did have before with the contact for the finances that you could put that it was your treasurer. If it's the same person, the treasurer, please put the information in twice. It's about an import. The import tool that we have to bring it into Razor's Edge, it just really keeps it nice and clean for us if we can have it twice. I know it's a little bit more work for you, so sorry about that. Blame our database, that's what we always do. So finally, you've got everything up, everything's loaded, everything's good. You've checked everything with all the people who need to be checked. You've sent it to presbytery if they've asked you to send it to them first. They've checked the numbers. You're ready to submit it to national office. It's before April 15th, 2022. Click that Submit Statistical Report button. Do not click the button until all the fields are completed, because you can't edit a submitted form. If you have changes after you've pressed that, please email or call Jackie, because it means all the numbers have already been uploaded, and we'll help decide at that point what's best to do. We might decide that if there was big mistakes, to delete everything and allow you to do it again. But if there's only a few mistakes, then we'll probably just ask you to give them to us over the phone or by email, and we'll just manually change them in our database. When you hit Submit Statistical Report, you're going to receive a copy of your final form data by email. And what was Maggie's line? Check your spam box. And if it's not in your spam box, email Jackie. She'll help figure it out for you. And remember to share it with your presbytery clerk. Reminder, the deadline is April 15th, 2022. All right, I think, okay, yes, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's going to talk about extracting the data for the reports. So I think there's 2 or 3 more slides, and then we'll get to our final question period where we'll address some of the ones that have been collecting in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, there are just 4 slides here, so we'll try and be quick and let's get back to your questions. This does say data comes from your financial statements. For the statistical return, that's probably optimistic. Morris said earlier, you really have to kind of pull out certain figures. And that's how the second part of this bullet's really important. You really should try and reconcile the total revenue and your total expenses on your financial statements to what you put into the statistical return. If you don't, you won't know if you've got it right or wrong. There may be some things that are different. And again, Morris talked about the debt principal. You don't normally expense debt principal. So reconcile. You should be able to have something that says you've got your total per your statements for expenses and the total in the statistical return. And if there's a different, you should know what the difference is, or else you'll be in a little bit of a mess. Okay, next slide. This is just a kind of encouragement if you're new as to how you group your accounts and whatnot in your accounting software. That will probably help you more to do your financial statements than actually do the statistical return, just because of the nature of the return. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the income part, and the last column on this slide shows you the line number on the statistical return that the item goes to. And you can see there's not too many lines. 14 is mentioned a lot, which reflects what Karen was saying. Where you get more than one box or more than one line mentioned. So we'll pick the first one there that's got that special donations and appeals. And it's got line 14, 16, and 18. That's usually where you have this concept that Karen emphasized, where you have some stuff that's for the current year, some stuff for the future, and that would go into the middle box, and some big stuff, which is 18, and that's why it goes there. So one way of using this form is to, if you have a choice, then carefully read what it's saying in the guide, because that will help you understand why certain things can go in different boxes. Don't just assume that everything goes in 14 or 16. Okay, next slide. And you'll see this is the expenses, and you'll see here that almost everything goes in box 23. And the things that don't go in box 23 are the things that you're specifically asked for. And that's, I think it was Morris that dealt with a lot of that, and the principal minister's stipend and information up there. And then down at the bottom of that form, just as Karen was going over, how you break up the donations to both the national church and other charities. So the good thing about this form is it shows you where you have a choice to be made, and you don't have too many. Most stuff goes in line 23. Okay, that's my presentation.
Fabulous. So for just a reminder that we are going to be posting the recording and the slides and the notes at presbyterian.ca. You can remember this link. I'll be sending you a link. You can also just go to the search button in the presbyterian.ca and type in leadership webinar, treasurer webinar, and you'll find them there. If in doubt or you really can't find them, send us an email and we'll point you in the right direction. Do give us about a week to post everything. It's a really busy time of year for us, and we do some cleanup, and we're trying to get the Q&As answered and all of that. So we're hoping we'll have it up for you maybe Monday or Tuesday, but just be a little bit patient. The contact information, if you've got questions for us, feel free to ask us. And then, yeah, so now, upcoming webinars. If you've got an interest in the future webinar, you've got a subject you really think would be a great discussion point and might take hopefully 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to try not to do the marathon ones that we've been doing now. Send us an idea and we'll try and cover that for you. Okay, let's get back to the questions.